Hello and welcome to episode 112 of the Hoop Theory podcast, recording this one on the afternoon of Wednesday, April 9th in the year of our Lord 2025. My name is Logan Wertman, and unlike usual, I am not joined by my co-host Jacob Roth today because this is somewhat of an emergency pod. I know most times you do emergency pod, it's supposed to be the same day of the thing that you're talking about, but this is actually the next day. This is April 9th. The thing that happened that I'm talking about is Michael Malone and Malone Booth, the head coach and the GM of the Denver Nuggets, both being fired within a week of the playoffs, which is pretty unprecedented. So, yeah, it's kind of an emergency pod, but, yesterday wasn't able to record one. I actually didn't even hear about this news until 6 hours after it happened, I think, because I'm actually not even sure what time this news broke, but the first texts I started to get were around noon or 12:30 or something like that yesterday. And I had my phone on silent. I often do that when I'm working. I don't like the distractions. So, I was working on videos, editing stuff for about 6 hours. It was about 6:30 that I looked at my phone and saw the barrage of texts from people, friends, family members, all that kind of stuff. So, was not able to kind of give my reaction like I kind of wish I would have been able to if I would have seen it right when it happened. But, that's just the way things go. But yeah, anyways, before we get into the rest of this episode, I should do the quick housekeeping things. The name of the episode, I'm sure you guys noticed that at the beginning in the intro, I didn't say a name for the episode like I usually do. I just said episode 112. I guess the reason for that is because it's hard to pick a person for this episode. And also, I just feel like it should go to Michael Malone. So this is going to be the Michael Malone episode, just, kind of in honor of him. Because, the candidates that I do have for it are just not really, most of them don't work because I've already used them and they're not quite to the level of player that I'm okay with using multiple times. The only players we have used multiple times are Kobe, which we've actually used 3 times. For episode 8, 24, and 81. Michael Jordan, obviously, for 23 and 45. Then LeBron James for 61. And actually, I think we've only used LeBron once, I want to say. So he will probably get another one eventually. I feel like we've only used him once. I might be wrong on that. But the other person, I believe, is Tim Duncan, is the only other person who's gotten multiple episodes named after them. That was for the year he was drafted, I believe. So 97. And then also 21, jersey number. So to me, you have to be, at least close to that class of player. And the closest guy that comes in there that was a candidate for today's episode title was Anthony Davis. He's already had an episode named after him for the year that he was drafted. No, that would be this episode. Yeah, this episode is 112. I don't remember why Anthony Davis has had, his career high, 59. Episode 59. And then Dwight Howard is the other guy I thought of for jersey number 12, kind of going back to the traditional way of naming the episodes. Because the original episode 12, I actually did for Fat Lever, which is probably going to come up here in a while in this podcast episode, Nuggets legend. But, Dwight Howard is probably the best jersey number 12 overall all time. And so I thought about giving it to him too, but we've already used Dwight Howard for his draft year for 2005, I believe, or 6 maybe, one of those two, I want to say. And then Damian Lillard is the other guy for this draft besides AD. AD was the first pick. Damian Lillard, the other best player from this draft, 2012. But he's already had his own episode title for his career high, 71. And then you get into like Andre Drummond might be the best. I don't know. I need to look into it a little bit deeper probably, but the next guy in win shares, at least on Basketball Reference, which is usually how I sort them just to get an idea of, the best players from the draft. The next guy on win shares is Andre Drummond. And I'm kind of feeling like we're passing the line now of, giving an episode to a player instead of just giving it to Michael Malone. Even though 112 means nothing for Michael Malone, it's just, very relevant. It's going to be this episode, So, and then Dion Waiters was another guy I thought of from the 12 draft, just as an idea, just because he's one of my guys I use loosely. Not really my guy in terms of like how he played basketball, but he was from Syracuse and I was a big Syracuse fan. He was right in the kind of prime of me cheering for the Syracuse Orange. So he holds a special place in my heart, I guess. But yeah, I didn't feel like that would suffice as the reason for an episode title for this one. But anyways, before we get into the rest, I would like to thank everybody for listening. Please be sure to hit us up on Patreon or buy me a coffee if you would like to support us. That's patreon.com/hooptheory and buymeacoffee.com/hooptheory. All of our links can also be found in the description of both the show and the episode, wherever you're watching or listening to this. We would also greatly appreciate it if you would rate the show, leave a like or a comment. Of course, be sure to subscribe and follow the feed. And lastly, we would also love it if you sent something into our mailbag for us to read and react to, basketball related or otherwise. You could send those over to hooptheory.mailbag@gmail.com. And so without further ado, let's finally get into it. Malone and Booth, both gone. Why? I guess is the first question. There's been kind of a cold war, is how it's been described by a lot of people, going on for the past couple years, really ever since we won the title. But I mean, it stems from even before that. Really, the beginnings of it that I know of, at least, were when Booth first got hired, I think is where it all kind of started. As the GM, I'm not sure if I said that yet, Calvin Booth. I'm sure if you're listening to the show, you probably know. So Calvin Booth getting hired back in, I think 2022 would have been the offseason that he was hired on. He was promoted from assistant GM after Tim Conley, who is the former GM, the guy who, drafted Jokic and Murray and the whole squad, really, after he left for the Timberwolves job, where they paid him a bonkers amount of money, the most money, I believe, still of any GM, I want to say, other than maybe like Pat Riley or something, but just kind of an impossible deal to turn down. He ended up leaving, and, Calvin Booth ended up getting the job. Culture totally shifted right away. You heard people talk about how the front office used to be a lot more open and collaborative, and everybody kind of in lockstep, kind of having alignment organizationally. When Calvin Booth took over, it became a lot more like he kind of siloed himself off from the rest of the organization. He kind of had his own opinions, own thoughts, own direction that he wanted for the roster and didn't like to budge on, things like that. So he kept a lot of his decision making just kind of to himself for the most part. And I think that was just kind of the beginning of that disagreement that he ended up having with Michael Malone, who is very, you can't just go against what Michael Malone thinks. That's kind of one of the qualities he has as well, that I feel like they're both probably not great at collaborating, not great at budging, conceding, things to other people, when I think like Tim Connelly probably succeeded in that way because he was a lot more open and collaborative. But anyways, going back to the beginning of this season, there was, I had heard people talking about this whole situation, how it got to a point that basically Booth and Malone weren't even speaking to each other day to day, like at all. They just stopped talking to each other altogether. And even back in training camp, I remember hearing quotes saying like that you could feel it in the locker room with the players. Like there's clear kind of Booth guys and there's Malone guys. And, it's kind of like this Civil War type of situation. So I am surprised by the timing, but I'm not surprised at all by the move. Maybe surprised a tiny bit by them both being fired. I never really thought about that. I feel like that was not something that I had ever thought would happen. But when it did happen, I also didn't feel super surprised by that, if that makes sense. Because it makes sense as soon as I think about it, even though that's not something that I had thought about before. But to me, it makes sense that obviously like they're in this big power struggle that was going on for so long, and if it's affecting the team clearly this season. And so finally you just decide to, I guess, get rid of them both instead of letting one of them win this power struggle. I do kind of like the idea of that, But, like the timing of it, like I said, is a little crazy at first glance. It's definitely questionable right before the playoffs start. But I honestly think that the thinking on it is this season is a waste, really, for the way it was going with Michael Malone for the most part. There was a part of me that was very hopeful about this playoff still, even though we've had this terrible stretch down the stretch of the season. Just because, we haven't been healthy really this whole time for the most part. And the Nuggets, that we've closed a lot of seasons in poor fashion. The year we won the title, we closed that season in poor fashion. Not quite this bad, but we also were more healthy. But now with Jamal being out, word has been that he's supposed to be back for the start of the playoffs. And so I just feel like I still have a good feeling about us against any team in the West other than the Thunder and I guess head to head against the Wolves. But, I feel like we're more of a contender than the Wolves overall. But Jamal, like just having everybody back, Aaron Gordon, full strength and everything, I just felt like we had something to work with. And I felt like we could have made some noise in the playoffs still. I was hopeful about that at least. But I also feel like I'm maybe even more hopeful for this postseason now, though, because Jokic is just one of one. I've always really liked what I've seen from David Adelman when he takes over for Malone as interim, when Malone's been sick or gone for some reason or, thrown out of a game from time to time, that those types of things when we've seen Adelman as the coach. I've really liked things he's tried. I've really liked different rotations he's gone with. He's played more like guys that I feel like have been deserve more playing time in the rotation, like Vlatko Čančar and so on and so forth. So I'm excited to see what that brings. And he's always been, he's the offensive coordinator. He has been for years now, basically the offensive coach. That Malone kind of delegated that role to him, and that's where the Nuggets shine is on offense. So I'm hopeful about that, and all the guys really like him. I've heard from all of those guys, especially Jokic, talking him up over the years. So I guess I'm excited about that. But honestly, before we get into really all this stuff, like the whole timeline and everything, which I've already kind of started to cheat and go into on accident, but I don't want to get into any of that quite yet because, I don't want to get into any of Malone's flaws and why I thought, this was basically inevitable. I'd like to first give a proper farewell to Michael Malone because, that's the worst thing about this situation is that it's just kind of tossing somebody who is such an important figure in Nuggets history, just tossing him to the side in a way that feels abrupt and disrespectful. So, yeah, I'll just give this farewell, I guess, to Michael Malone really quick. Quick is in quotes. I don't know how long this will take. So just buckle up, I guess. Greatest coach in Denver Nuggets history. That's just for sure. Just based off of the accolades and everything, he cemented himself as that. Only ring in franchise history belongs to him as a coach. 471 wins is what he ended up with on his career with the Nuggets. And he's got a winning percentage of 59%. He passed Doug Moe for all-time wins this season as a Nuggets coach, which, is that 432 number hanging in the rafters. Doug Moe was the coach of the 80s Nuggets with Alex English and Fat Lever, the best offense of the 80s that could just, never make it over the hump against the Showtime Lakers with Pat Riley and Magic and Kareem. But, Malone, he just brought something to this team that was very special. He empowered Jokic, this whole Jokic era. Malone has to be given a lot of credit for just ushering us into this, because I don't know if every coach discovers what Jokic does on the court in the way that Malone was so quick to empower him to, coming from the 41st pick, who was a Eurostash, didn't even come over till a year later. Not a lot of tangibles, that were like, that's like a future franchise player or anything like that. I don't even know if he really thought he was going to be a franchise player, honestly, but he ended up going with him and installing him as the starting center when it was like a big hot button situation with the team about who should start between him and Yusuf Nurkic, who's the higher pick, more the higher caliber, prospect and whatnot. But he ended up choosing Jokic. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And then also allowing Chris Finch, who was the offensive coordinator at the time, to really just center everything around Jokic on the offensive end as they started to develop that scheme and that, the dribble handoff, like really just all the offensive kind of core tenets that we still use today with the Nuggets. I'm going to say we every once in a while. I'm trying not to this episode. I just caught myself there saying we. I'm trying to say they. I know people don't like it when I say we, but I slip up and say it sometimes. But so bear with me on that, I guess. But yeah, Malone empowered Jokic. That's just something that we need to give him props for. And then, he just had this great relationship with a lot of the players, especially Jamal Murray. I think that was the closest bond that he formed on the Nuggets roster. Just rehabbing him back after the injury, giving him like just all the confidence in the world when he would struggle, all that kind of stuff. Like, I think he deserves a lot of credit for that, for what Jamal has brought to us as well, and you'll not find a bigger Malone, defender amongst the players in the locker room than Jamal Murray. I think this move, out of like everybody on the team, this is affecting Jamal Murray the most negatively, He's definitely the one that's going to have to recover from this the most, I feel like. Also, Malone, he gave the Nuggets an edge publicly that we never really had before. I just said we again. I'm sorry. But he gave the Nuggets an edge that they never had publicly. The Nuggets for a long time have kind of felt like the little brother, the small market team that when the big market teams come into town, like the Lakers, Knicks, Bulls, Celtics, Warriors, the arena would contain, an alarming amount of those teams' fans. Several years back when Malone was asked about this, he gave what is now an iconic quote in Nuggets culture, and that is, "They're welcome to come in here, just take that L on the way out." That's on t-shirts and everything now. You'll see that if you go to Nuggets games. But also in this same vein, he stood up to the Lakers in a way that no one else ever did, especially as like a coach in the NBA. The Lakers have always been the Nuggets bully. Ever since the Nuggets came over in the ABA merger, honestly, it's just been that way. Every single highest point in Nuggets franchise history was eventually squandered by the Lakers. Prior to 2023, the Nuggets had found themselves in the NBA Western Conference Finals a total of 4 times. The first was with the 2 best players in franchise history up until that point, and still 2 of the best to this day, honestly. I'd have them 3rd and 5th, respectively, and that's David Thompson and Dan Issel. That was the 1978 Western Conference Finals, just 2 years after coming into the NBA in the merger. They lost that series in 6 games to the Seattle Supersonics, who went on to face the Washington Bullets in back-to-back finals matchups. Bullets won in 78, Sonics won in 79. But literally every other time the Nuggets have gone to the Western Conference Finals, they've lost to the Lakers. In 1985 with Alex English, who by the way was the best Nugget of all time until Jokic came around. Calvin Nat was also on that team, and Fat Lever. And then Dan Issel was actually still around playing his final season at age 36. But still a vital contributor, and honestly would have been a shoo-in for the 6 Man of the Year award most seasons if it weren't for going against an absolute cheat code of a candidate in Kevin McHale, who literally made the All-Star team even though he was coming off the bench for the Celtics. But the Nuggets lost that series in 5 to that year's champs, the 85 Lakers, who outside of the 87 Lakers were the best Laker team of the Showtime era, which was 80 to 91. And then the next West Finals appearance the Nuggets had was in 2009 with Carmelo Anthony, who, by the way, while I'm giving all my all-time Nuggets rankings, I have 4th behind Jokic, Alex English, and David Thompson, and then right ahead of Dan Issel. Probably could have ended up even higher, if we're being honest, if he would have stuck around instead of quitting on a contending team and forcing a trade to the Knicks right in the middle of his prime. But it's all okay now because one of those picks did end up turning into Jamal Murray. But back to the 2009 Western Conference Finals, Chauncey Billups, Nene, Kenyon Martin, those guys were all on that team. This team also had another 6 Man of the Year runner-up in J.R. Smith. The Birdman, Chris Anderson, was also coming off the bench, and then coached by George Karl, who outside of Doug Moe and Michael Malone is probably the 3rd best coach in franchise history. Melo went toe-to-toe with Kobe in this series. It was honestly a great head-to-head duo matchup as well between Melo and Chauncey, and then Kobe and Pau Gasol. But Melo and Kobe were just so great that series individually as scorers, that it just kind of lives on as this one-on-one duel. But the Nuggets ended up losing that series in 6. The Kobe and Pau Lakers went on to win the first of their back-to-back titles in 2009 and 10. And the next Western Conference Finals appearance for the Nuggets would be in 2020 in the bubble. This playoffs marked the moment that Jokic ascended from a good all-star center who broke into All-NBA every once in a while. And, he ascended from that into a fully fledged MVP caliber player, and he has never looked back. This was the year of the back-to-back 3-1 comebacks by the Nuggets. I believe the 12th and the 13th 3-1 comebacks in NBA history. And, they did them back-to-back, which had obviously never been done before. No team had ever actually even had multiple in the same year or even back-to-back years or anything like that. So definitely some, groundbreaking stuff there. But yeah, that was the Jazz in the first round and the Clippers in the second. Jamal Murray went absolutely nuclear in that first round, multiple 50-point games in that duel with Donovan Mitchell. And this was also the real coming onto the scene moment for the Jokic and Murray two-man game in that second round against the Clippers. After going down 3-1, the Nuggets finally decided to just run it every single play as long as they couldn't stop it, because they physically could not stop it while they had Montrezl Harrell and to a lesser extent Ivica Zubac in there guarding Jokic. And then also Lou Williams guarding Jamal Murray was a guy that kept getting picked on as well. But Doc Rivers, decided to just not adjust the rotation at all and kept playing those guys super heavy minutes, just sticking with them. And it immediately cost him his job. And then the Nuggets ran into what I think is one of the most underrated teams this century in the 2020 Lakers. Best defense in the league, with AD surrounded by switchy guards and wings, with KCP, Alex Caruso, Rajon Rondo, Danny Green, Kyle Kuzma, Markieff Morris, and then also somehow 2 other big athletic rim protectors in Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee. And then, LeBron quarterbacking the defense as he does. But even then, I remember watching, it really felt like the Nuggets were maybe going to do it, honestly. With Jokic just overcoming the Lakers having an answer for literally everything. Jokic, just by sheer will, started backing down AD and whoever was on him under the basket and scoring play after play after play down the stretch in Game 2. He put the Nuggets in position to win even when it felt like the Lakers were just insurmountable. But then the mix-up happened, there at the end. Mason Plumlee and Jeremy Grant both staying with LeBron on the inbounds play. Plumlee pre-switched a screen that never even came. AD flared over to the wing, wide open, and hit the game-winning 3. Jokic was actually the only guy to close out on him. Jokic was guarding the inbounder on the play down on the baseline because he just turned around and saw no one was there. That shot was just devastating. It was a soul-crushing loss for the Nuggets, who had been giving their all that whole playoff run. Felt like they were just kind of out of gas. It felt like if they can't win a game like that where they did all that they could, put literally everything they had into it, and it still ended up breaking for the Lakers. It felt like they were kind of done at that point, honestly. And the Nuggets went on to lose that series in 5 to the eventual champs. And then KCP, actually, who was on the Lakers at the time, said after the series that he thought the Nuggets would have won that series if it were not for AD making that shot in Game 2. But yeah, so prior to 2023, 28 playoff appearances for the Nuggets, faced off against the Lakers in exactly 1/4 of all of those playoff runs. So that's 7 times out of the 28. And they lost every single one of them. Until the 2023 Western Conference Finals, where the Nuggets swept the Lakers and then beat them in 5 in the Western Conference quarterfinals in 2024. In the 2023 championship run and in the parade, Malone continuously taunted the Lakers because he understood what overcoming them meant to this franchise, which was just really important and special, that he understood the history of it. He understood what the Lakers kind of represented for the Nuggets. And, in the parade, that famous clip of being called the Lakers daddy, and there were several other things that he said in interviews, kind of taunting or taking jabs at LeBron and the Lakers in that kind of press run media tour after winning the ring, and also just criticizing the media for, after the Nuggets beating the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals that year, how all of the national media narrative, like all the talking points were just, what did the Lakers do wrong? Like how the Lakers lost that series, basically, instead of giving the Nuggets praise and congratulations, So He was just he was a big advocate, for the Nuggets, which was, I think, a big thing, honestly. And overall, Malone, just a great motivator as a coach, just a great coach overall, honestly. I do think he's a very old school, traditional coach, and some of the just general flaws that you get with that type of a coach, in the modern day era, modern day schemes in basketball, like those are really the main flaws. So it's no different than you would expect from somebody that has that kind of a stylistic outlook or whatnot. But yeah, he was just a great motivator. Even though he was hard on young guys like Michael Porter Jr., I think he just knew that those things would make MPJ better. Punishing him for the mistakes he would make on the defensive end early on in his career instead of just giving him like super long leash. I think Porter's, I think, the main example of a player that's been molded by Malone in a way that it worked out like the best way possible. The way that he's so receptive to coaching and to criticism and like adjusting his role, taking the blame for things. He's just very honest and open about those kinds of things, which, a lot of people, even Nuggets fans, but a lot of, especially people who aren't Nuggets fans, looking at the Nuggets from an outside perspective, I feel like kind of treat MPJ as a scapegoat in a lot of ways, which some ways is fair, with his contract and everything. But in other ways, though, I never want to see us move on from MPJ. And I think that version of MPJ that exists now, there's no way that guy exists without Michael Malone. So that's just another thing I would like to give Malone credit for. But anyways, kind of moving on from the farewell, which I know this is not enough to make up for kind of just being really just, like tossed aside, like I said before, right before the playoffs start. It's kind of a disrespectful move, I would say. I do see that, and I think that's the biggest downside about this to me. The thing I don't like the most about it. So I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that, I guess. And then Malone versus Booth is kind of this power struggle that no one wins in. Like I said before, I think the idea of making this move now is because you don't want one of them to win this power struggle because of what that could mean for different players, different people in the organization that kind of align themselves more with that, person. And then also, I think another thought for doing it now is because it might be a shot in the arm to this team by getting rid of that distraction and getting them some extra motivation, things like that. And Jokic is just one of one. I feel like, even though I just gave Malone all this credit for all these things, I do feel like for the actual 2023 championship run, I do feel like Malone is given a little bit too much credit sometimes with those things, because I just feel like with almost any coach that's like an NBA quality coach, Jokic would have a title by now. I do believe that, but also with most GMs, I think that the way that Murray and MPJ have been, the way that they like kind of hamstring this roster construction wise because of their massive albatross deals, they lock up all this money on players that aren't as productive as the money would suggest. That really makes things harder. But yeah, so kind of diving into the timeline of the Malone versus Booth saga, or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of started off with Booth hiring a shooting coach very early on. He hired a lot of people, brought in a lot of people, tried to kind of reconstruct the whole organization. But one move that he made in particular was a shooting coach that he hired to be on, the coaching staff. And Malone, who had already been there for like 7 years at that point as the head coach, 6 or 7 years, something like that, very established. Like Booth wasn't really ahead of Malone in the power pecking order. They were kind of like neck and neck, but Malone felt like this was a move that Booth was making with a kind of side agenda going on, having his guy. He hires a coach that is kind of like a Booth guy to be on the Nuggets coaching staff, even though Malone should be the guy in charge of hiring coaches and everything. He might have kind of looked at it as like it's a spy from Booth, that Booth just wants to keep tabs on the coaching staff in a way that it kind of felt like a diss to Malone. And so, even though there's this shooting coach that's on the coaching staff now, he was not like allowed to be a part of the actual coaching staff. He was just like, he was kind of like an auxiliary coach that would come in and work with specific guys like Zeke Naji and some other people on shooting, but he wasn't allowed to be in the practices. So like they had to leave the building, leave the gym to go work on stuff, or they had to schedule time in the gym where, normal stuff wasn't going on and stuff like that. So there was all those workarounds there. So I felt like that was kind of like a very early on sign of what was to come. And then, all the jabs in the media that they've been taking at each other over the past couple of years, when Malone criticizes having such a young team and trying to be able to develop that roster and trying to win now, at the same time. And then also Booth making comments about guys not playing or guys playing in out of position, positions they shouldn't be, and how, they would be developing better. They would be looking a lot better if they were used in different ways and stuff like that. And I guess what's important to understand about this also is just what Booth's vision was and why it didn't align with Malone's. And so just to look at that a little bit, like inherently, I don't think Booth's vision was bad. A lot of people are very against Booth, like in the Nuggets community and NBA community at large. There's a lot more Malone fans than there are Booth fans, for sure. I consider myself more of a Malone fan overall, I would say. But like, I kind of agree with it just in what they were fighting about. I do kind of agree with Booth's philosophy on it a little bit. At least I would be open to, trying it in a way that Malone was just absolutely not at all. So, there's blame to go both ways there with Booth. It's like you have a coach that struggles with this, playing young players, developing them. Maybe don't try this, especially when he's actively saying like, get me different players. Don't do what you're doing. And then also Malone being given young players shouldn't just count them out, or like he would treat a lot of young players, especially the ones that were like specific Booth guys. He would just not ever give them chances and kind of stack the deck against them in certain ways, kind of root against them, became very apparent over time. But like what Booth's idea was to, instead of becoming a team like the Suns that we see now, which is an extreme version, but also like the Bucks, a team that won the championship, but they have all this money locked up into Supermax player and then other max players as well, with Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday for a while. Both those guys are gone now, actually. I said that like Chris Middleton was still there, but I just remembered Chris Middleton is not still there. That's beside the point, though. At the time, though, with those three guys taking up all the money, and then Brook Lopez also being paid a lot, Bobby Portis had no more contracts to go around other than minimums. So like they were just completely depleted of like depth, where they just had to sign all these year-to-year minimum guys that were kind of journeyman, fringe players. And they had no draft picks because of, the Drew Holiday trade and other moves that they had made in this Dame one now, So they just didn't have any young talent that was like bolstering the roster, developing in-house. Like they had to fill out their roster, fill out their lineup like every single season with new rotating cast of journeymen. And there just wasn't a lot of value there. And so I think, obviously what Booth's theory is there, where it's like, yes, that's a challenge that a lot of the best teams will have to face after they've built this championship roster, or core rather. And he's thinking, how can I get some additional value by, instead of having those minimum deals for like, older players that just come in and then might hit, might not, but, do their job, go home, aren't going to do they're not going to step out of the role at all. They're not going to give you more value than, they were expected to, usually, all that kind of stuff. But he's thinking, how do I work around that? How do I get more value out of those spots on the roster? And his thought was to just be a better scout than everybody else, like draft well late in the draft, draft older guys that can come in and develop quickly. So they're pieces that can provide some value, like a journeyman, like a that kind of player, but they're even cheaper because they're second round draft picks, and they're still doing that job, and maybe some of them can develop and pop and jump out of those roles, as we've seen with Christian Brown, and to a certain extent Peyton Watson. Like I think that exists, and like he was right to a certain extent with some of those players, despite all the sabotaging that Malone would do with not trying not to develop those guys, or playing like Justin Holiday and all these different guys over those players, and then Booth just straight up going like, nope, we're getting rid of all these veterans that you keep playing over these young guys, because he's like, no, I want you to play the young guys. So that it became a thing where they're actively just trying to beat each other in this weird game instead of making the team better. It became more about that than like making the team better, because it was like, from Booth's point of view, like you want to have those vets mixed in there, like that were providing good roles and everything, but like he intentionally was like, I'm going to get rid of all of these guys and just have the young guys, so Malone is forced to play them, which was just not the right move at that point. Like that, you gotta concede at a certain point and not like literally sabotage your own team in order to prove your point, or like to benefit your agenda, so that I felt like that was a big key mistake there, obviously on his part. But Julian Strawther is the one example of one of these young guys that has come in and Malone has given like the longest leash to, like way longer than his minutes on the court have deserved him in comparison to all the other players that have played in the Malone era. Like every other player is like Michael Porter Jr. even, like players come in and they are pulled like right away, as soon as they make certain mistakes and whatnot. Strawther plays through, like he's the most hunted player on the team defensively. He fouls like every play that he's in there. I actually like Strawther more than a lot of players, or more than a lot of people do. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of people that think he shouldn't play at all. I see what he can be, and I don't mind playing him. I just am pointing out that Malone doesn't do that with other players who have deserved it even more. Like Peyton Watson still is a guy that gets less of a leash than Julian Strawther does. And Peyton Watson has shown much more actual tangible like things on the court, like things to reasons to trust him as a rotation player. He's shown way more of that than Julian Strawther so far. Julian Strawther hasn't even been that outstanding of a shooter in a like actual percentage sense. Like clearly the way, like the types of shots he can make and the types of ways he can get his shots off, like he's clearly a shooter. I'm not saying he's not at all. He's got that to his game, but he has been inconsistent with it. And then also he's just bringing down the team on the defensive end in so many ways. So it just hurts having him out there a lot of times. And I don't think he's quite ready for like a playoff rotation, really. But that the thing is, the reason why I'm getting into this is that's the rare example of a Malone guy here, because apparently when they're making those draft selections in the 23 draft, I believe that was, right after they won the championship, excuse me. Julian Strawther was one of the picks in there that it was a guy that Malone kind of scouted out and wanted. And I think maybe even from Josh Kroenke's intervention, the owner, saying like, because they had feuds with literally everything. Malone and Booth, they disagreed on players they liked and all that kind of stuff. And I think Kroenke might have been like, here, Malone, you get this guy, the guy that you really like, and then Booth, you can take the other two picks with guys that you want. So that, honestly, I think that's how that coalesced, or how that happened. Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson being the other two guys who have not gotten near the amount of leash as Julian Strawther has, and especially Jalen Pickett being having the cards kind of or deck stacked against him. Like early on in training camp, his rookie year, there was like the position battle between him and Colin Gillespie, who was a guy left over from the season before as a 2A contract, undrafted guy that Malone seemed to like, but he was injured that whole season, so he never really got a chance. But, Jalen Pickett was an actual full roster member, being used a draft pick on him coming in here. I think the idea obviously was that Booth wanted him to be as the backup point guard or potential backup point guard, with Reggie Jackson being the other option there. But Malone ended up just like in training camp, coming in and like rearranging teams and stacking things to like try to just put Jalen Pickett's like flaws on display and all that kind of stuff. Try to give Colin Gillespie the best chance to succeed in scrimmages and stuff, and Jalen Pickett the opposite, And then also the other big example of this, like the player chess pieces, being pawns in this war going back and forth, was Zeke Naji. He represents a big thing about, the disagreements that they had. Like Zeke Naji was drafted to be like a big wing, switchable defender type of guy. That was Booth's vision for him. But also we didn't have a great backup center. And so that's where Malone ended up naturally kind of using him, which he did not look the best at doing. And then especially for little stretches, would look very bad at, which most of our backup centers have, honestly. And so that basically dropped him out of the rotation entirely. And this happened right after Zeke Naji was given an $8 million annual deal. And the reason behind this being, it was like a kind of overpaying for what Zeke Naji had completely shown to be on the court so far. But a lot of people, and me personally, I personally thought like that's the type of player he would end up being worth that. And then also the idea behind it was like the way the roster was constructed, we had all of these max contracts with, 3 maxes and then 1 near max in Aaron Gordon. And then KCP was also, $20 million annual contract. And then everybody else was just down at like $1, $2, $3 million a year, the minimums. And so there's not really any tradable contracts there outside of the core guys. And that's something that's kind of important for a team to have. And so that was the thought behind the Zeke Naji deal, as being like a mid-level amount, deal that can fit into trades pretty easily. And he's a younger guy that, like, as long as he doesn't just completely crap the bed, or just not play, then that deal should have worked out just fine. But it ended up not working out at all because he immediately did not like play at all for a couple years, really. At least like a year and a half, was just not a player in the rotation at all. And a lot of people do think that was Malone, because he already had all these disagreements with Booth. That was just Malone ensuring that it's like, oh, look at that mistake that Booth just made. He just gave a contract to a guy that doesn't play. That, I think that was kind of like the idea behind why Malone decided to do what he did. I'm not saying like if Naji would have like just shown out and played super well in the limited minutes at backup center that he got, then I think Malone would have kept playing him. But I think Malone used that as kind of like a tiebreaker type of thing, like as like a, if he's not playing all that well and there's other options here, I'm not going to play Zeke Naji. I'm going to, like, the tiebreaker goes to every other option all the time, because Zeke Naji is Booth's guy and he's getting paid $8 million a year. And I'm rooting for him to fail, because then that would mean that Booth made a big mistake and should get fired, basically. So at least that's a lot of people's opinion on it, Yeah, those are some of the sabotage things that I wanted to kind of fit in here. But I guess where I started all this, like Booth's vision, I understand the vision that Booth had, which was to develop younger guys in the draft, get high value late draft picks because they're older guys, but they fit your culture, fit like the style of play that you need. You just need shooting and all these different things that you want to fill on the roster. Find those skill sets and those things with those players who you pay less money, and then they can also be there for a long time, in Denver, and develop chemistry with the whole roster with Jokic in the core. And then also some of them will pop into being like full-fledged like members of the core, like Christian Brown has, and like Peyton Watson is looking like he is. And honestly, verdict's not out. Like Julian Strawther can be, maybe Jalen Pickett. Even he had a triple double in an NBA game recently, which is just wild. But just things like that. So that's why I liked Booth's vision from that sense. Like I understood it, and also I think Booth just has a great eye for talent. Just seeing players and what they can be in the NBA. I think every pick he's made has been like, yeah, that guy works. Whether or not he's actually made it into the rotation all that much. But the reason why it went wrong is I think honestly couldn't develop the guys fast enough to like really click in a way that was like you can play them all these minutes in the rotation and still win games and everything. But I wonder if that would have happened the same way if it were not for Malone's stubbornness and sabotaging that he had done, for that plan. So, yeah, there's that. And then also, I'm going to miss Booth's, one thing I'm going to miss about Booth, I guess, is his brutally honest way of talking with the media. I did really appreciate that. I know a lot of people didn't like it, but I really liked how he just was like, yep, this is exactly what I thought and why I chose this player instead of this player. Why, I was thinking about trading this guy, but we didn't because we couldn't find a trade for him. Like he would just say things like that, which obviously I see the downsides of also, but it was just kind of a fun thing to have, very unique experience, I guess, as a fan to have a GM like that. I doubt that the next one will be quite like that. But anyways, that's kind of like the Malone versus Booth stuff, I guess. That I think that probably serves. This is a little bit messy ever since I got out of the Malone farewell thing. My notes are just kind of scattered brain thoughts. I'm trying to fit this in during the day before I have to leave for an appointment. But going back to, I guess, like the thing when it happened and reactions people were having. Jacob was the first one to text me, and he was saying a lot of stuff about like how the Nuggets are going to blow it up, and Jamal was going to get traded, MPJ was going to get traded, all that kind of stuff. I highly doubt all of that. I guess the one fear that I do kind of have with this is once we get a new GM, especially if we kind of bow out in the playoffs this year, it doesn't look pretty. I think I'm a little bit afraid of new GM syndrome. You've heard of new owner syndrome, but I think new GM syndrome is also a thing. Where Jim comes in and feels like he has to just mix things up, make some big moves right away. And I think the clearest, biggest move there is an MPJ trade. If not, even bigger move would be a Jamal trade. But, those are kind of the low hanging fruit. I don't know. I don't know about that. If I was personally the GM, I probably wouldn't, because I do think that this core together can really win. I don't know. I like it. I do want to keep that core together. But I don't think that will happen, to be honest. But then also people asking, like, is Jokic gone? Is Jokic going to force a trade because he loved, Malone so much? But, I highly doubt that as well. Augie Stojakovic is still, on the staff, his childhood coach and personal, coach that he works on everything with. He's still there. There's no way he's gone. Vlatko Čančar still on team. Dario Saric, two really close friends of his, still here. And, Jamal, obviously, still here as well. And, how much he loves Denver is a big thing, I think, to factor into it. And then also his relationship with Josh Kroenke, the governor of the team. They've always been really tight from what it seems. And, like, for that reason, I would be really surprised if Josh Kroenke wasn't like consulting Jokic about this move, leading up to it. Sounds like, I feel like my theory at least is it probably has been a thing on Kroenke's radar for a while because, a few months ago is when we first heard that Kroenke, Stan Kroenke, I believe, but I think both of them, Stan the dad, like both of them were starting traveling with the team and they would sit like near the bench and just kind of monitor things going on. like I remember hearing that and think like that was one of the biggest reasons of why I thought that this offseason there would be a move that would be made, like either Malone would be fired or Booth would be fired. Um, I do think that move, or this move that they did end up making, was kind of accelerated maybe by the Taylor Jenkins firing. A few weeks ago, if you listened to the last episode, seeing that them just abandoned their coach right before the playoffs started to give their interim a little bit of runway to see if he's the guy they want to go with. So maybe borrowing from that idea a little bit, and then also like getting a head start on the job search with Taylor Jenkins, the coach that the Grizzlies moved on from, because he's a really good coach and honestly is going to be at the top of the list of candidates for the Nuggets, as will David Edelman, who is the interim, and giving him a chance to have a little bit of runway here to see what he can do will be part of that job search. And then honestly, I think this Nuggets head coaching position vacancy is like the most attractive, is going to be the most attractive head coaching spot in the league in recent memory. Like I feel like there's going to be some coaches that are even employed at the moment that are like looking at their contract, like how many years do I have left on that one? And just kind of eyeing this spot, because this position, it looks like an insane one to be in as a coach, to be able to coach the best player on earth, and not just like the most talented player that isn't great at coaching or whatnot. Like he's both the best player in the world, but also like the most coachable player, the most like most easy to work with, player. He can play any which way you want him to, sees so many different schemes and so many different like philosophies in basketball that he understands and can like mold and shift his way into and out of. It would be an insane position to be in. I think Taylor Jenkins is a guy that could definitely be in the running for that position, obviously, and might even let him, because like before this move was made, I felt like Taylor Jenkins would be a guy that would be hired off, like, picked off in the playoffs, like while the playoffs were still going on, which still might happen because of how good of a coach he is, that the Suns or whoever is going to have a head coach vacancy are going to swoop in and try to get him. But this might, I feel like probably will make him at least pause on that and want to give it more time if the Nuggets are still in the playoffs, or something like that, aren't able to have those discussions quite yet. Like give it time to see what his options are with the Nuggets, at least, see if the Nuggets have a spot for him. So that's something to monitor also. And then another thing that people are throwing around is Tim Conley coming back to the Nuggets as GM, like leaving the Timberwolves and coming back because of like another guy that's super tight with Jokic. The lesson to be learned from all this is like Jokic is just tight with everybody, basically, with the Nuggets. But like Tim Conley was, I think, from what I've heard, has been maybe even the most, more than Josh Kroenke. Like if there was a moment that Jokic would have like turned his back on the Nuggets, it would have been when Tim Conley left. Honestly, like that was the biggest thing that probably hit Jokic the hardest, probably even harder than this Malone one. But yeah, I don't know. That I would be open to it if Tim Conley came back. That's for sure. I don't know if that'll happen because he left this situation for all this money he's still getting paid, and I don't know if Kroenke's would match that contract or not. I kind of feel like they probably wouldn't. But another theory that's been floated out there by a lot of people is Michael Malone going on to replace Popovich, succeed him, which Popovich is kind of aging out, obviously struggling with health and everything this season. Them kind of looking for a new head coach. I don't know if it's going to be their interim guy with Mitch Johnson or, Brett Brown even is another one of their assistants on staff. They're usually a type of organization that stays in-house. Popovich obviously is still the president of basketball ops as well as the coach. So like he would be the one who appoints the next head coach to pass him or to, take over for him. And, like Popovich and Malone have been known to have like a super tight relationship. Like that's something that's been on display for a long time. I've been watching the NBA. Every time those guys face off against each other, the way that they talk about each other in the media, just kind of always giving each other praise and always interacting in such a, a fun public type of way. especially for a guy like Pop. There's few guys that interact with him quite in that way, and Malone's one of them. So we could see that happen. Also, I wouldn't be surprised by that, to be honest. I've also heard some theories about Jamal Murray's injury in regards to this, about like this being a bad sign, that like they think that Murray's not coming back, and that actually also escalated this to happen, because it's like, okay, this season is a throwaway. Murray's not even coming back. Let's just make this move now, which I don't really even totally understand the logic of that. I don't know. I don't know what I think about that theory, I guess. I feel like he's going to be okay. I feel like he's going to hopefully, come back and be able to work himself back into. He hasn't been out for like that long. It's not been like, injuries he's had before. I guess I'm not too worried about it, I would say, but that doesn't mean that there's not nothing there. There might be. And obviously if we don't have Murray, then yeah, this playoffs, you can probably count us out right now. If we're going to make a run, if we're going to go to the Western Conference finals or win the whole thing, maybe, like if any of those things are going to happen, I think we're going to have Jamal Murray playing basketball for us. Would be my take on it. But yeah, hopefully this move, unlocks some things with the Nuggets roster by removing this distraction from the locker room, from the players' minds. It's just kind of a tragedy that this went on for so long and was a cloud that was hanging over one of the best players of all time's prime. I think that's always going to kind of live on as the tragedy of this situation, that it wasted, some prime years for Jokic, and might have ripple effects, probably will have lasting effects on what the team does after this. So, it's rare that you get just immediate turnaround, immediate success with these kinds of things. But that's what I'm hopeful for, obviously. So, yeah, that'll probably be it for today's episode, I guess. I didn't really mention much about David Alman. I did a little bit, I think, just kind of in segments. But, he's the new interim, but like I'm excited to have him. I do think that I've been really impressed by stuff he's done over the years, taking over for Malone when he's been out. And part of me just really feels like the Nuggets are going to be really good this playoff. But I might say that, and we might look exactly the way we've been looking the past couple of weeks and just lose, like bow out, like get swept in the first round or something like that. But also, I don't know, maybe we could flip it around, and playing new guys that are super energized, and like Vlatko Čančar comes in and is like a big key piece. That would be very nice for me as like the number one Vlatko Čančar fan in the world. That would be cool to see. But yeah, I don't know if I've hit on quite everything that I wanted to, but I feel like I've done the full like circle, and trying to go back into anything else would just be a little bit too unnatural. So that's where I will leave this. That's my official reaction to this move. Overall, hopeful, but a lot of mixed emotions. Definitely sad about, an era left behind. And part of me feels like, what if we just made this move and just picked Malone? What if we just got rid of Booth? But also I do feel like there's some limitations, some things that Malone had with, how old school of a coach he is, late to make, certain adjustments, certain things that I feel like has kind of held the team back a little bit. I feel like empowering Jokic even more. Like Malone did a great job of the beginning of empowering Jokic, but Malone is still like this super, in charge guy. He's an important figure. He's a big presence that I feel like letting Jokic be even more of the coach, I think can't be a bad thing overall. And the thing I think we'll probably miss the most is that vocal motivator, because that's what Jokic lacks as a coach, or as a player coach, is the passionate, like, other than like some outbursts that he has every once in a while, but like the real like motivating type of leading coach type of guy. I think Malone fit that role really well. Adelman, not quite as much, I don't think, from what I've seen. He's much more, it seems like, the X's and O's tactician guy. Like I'm excited to see more of that, and also like smarter rotations and stuff like that. So yeah, that's where I'll leave it. I keep saying that, but that's where I'm actually going to leave it this time. Thank you for listening. Stay happy, stay healthy. I will talk to you guys, I guess. We probably will talk to you guys, both of us, me and Jacob, next episode. I'm guessing at least. We'll talk to you guys next episode. Bye-bye.